At the recent Title Tuesday, I had the chance to play against the strongest chess player in history, the 20-time world chess champion Magnus Carlsen. No bullet, no blitz. The time control was 5 minutes, which is more than enough for a quality game. An ordinary defeat. Of course, I wouldn't have posted it otherwise, so let's see what happened in our game. We met in the 6th round of the Title Tuesday. I opened the game with white playing d4, and on the board we got the king's Indian defense. I'm playing the line with the move, bishop to d3. This is a line I prepared for the World Rapid and Blitz Championship. There, I couldn't get to Magnus, but I managed to use this line here. At the World Championship, I beat Portnik in this line and also Ivan Zemlyansky. Overall, the line has performed very well. So here, the main continuation is bishop to g4. Sometimes they play c5, sometimes e5. Magnus chose a more standard path, knight to d7. Actually, I heard somewhere, someone told me, or maybe I read it in an interview, that Magnus doesn't like to play the king's Indian defense, neither as black nor as white. But nevertheless, here he played it. So castling an e5, this is all more or less a theoretical line. d5, you have to close the position here. In this situation, the bishop's placement on d3 is good because if black starts advancing on the king side, the bishop will start to show itself quite well. a5, a3, this is all basically the main line. Knight to c5, bishop to c2. Magnus played bishop to g4. Here, usually, people play bishop to d7 in order to have time to try to place the pawn on a 4. And before this, in the same Title Tuesday, I had a game where I messed up a bit here. I played rook to b1, a suboptimal move. You can play rook to e1 and provoke black to seize space. It seems like they gain space and take control of the queenside pawn structure, but in that case, there's a very strong move. Bishop to e3, I threaten to take the knight on c5 and then win the pawn. If you defend the pawn on a 4, then after taking on c5 and recapturing, there's the move d6. And this is an extremely unpleasant position for black, the pawns are hanging. The knight is coming to d5. This has also occurred in titled games, and I've managed to outplay my opponents here. So Magnus played bishop to g4, which is a possible move, I suppose. Then h3, and the reaction is clear, to exchange the light squared bishops. It is believed that if white manages to exchange black's light squared bishop in the king's Indian defense, then all further attacks that may arise on the king's side are not dangerous for white. After all, in the king's Indian defense, for black to be able to launch a mating attack, to attack the king, black needs the light squared bishop, which they often sacrifice, and which often supports the pawn advance. But here the light squared bishop is gone. Magnus still played a 4, taking control over my pawn structure. This is a standard move. Bishop to e3 attacks the knight on c5. I want to capture it so I can then take the pawn on a 4. Magnus plays knight to d7, and I play queen to d1, attacking the pawn on a 4. And now Magnus faces the question, how to defend this pawn? Well, the only move that defends the pawn on a 4 is knight to b6. But after knight to b6, I have a simple exchange operation here that wins a pawn. I can take the knight on c5 and capture the pawn on a 4. Obviously, if black exchanges the knight now, then I have an extra pawn, and black has a bad bishop, and basically good chances to win. Now, if you play knight to c4, which, by the way, the computer evaluates even worse than taking on a 4, then before capturing the pawn on c5, well, you cannot do it right away. Because the pawn on b2 is hanging, you need to make an intermediate move, attacking the knight and forcing it back, and only after that take the pawn on c5. Overall, after 18 moves, the computer evaluates the position as plus 1.2. At a high level, that's actually quite a significant advantage in the opening, and you can conclude that the opening battle against Magnus was won. But of course, that doesn't mean anything yet, because Magnus can get out of absolutely any situation on the board. He immediately starts pushing the pawns on the king side, h5, trying to seize space, activate his pieces, and create problems for me. I realize what's in front of me. There's a small question. How should I proceed? What plan should I choose? And of course, it would have been better for me to start an attack on the queen's side gradually here. After all, that's where I have the extra pawn. Moving the rook away at this point was a rather strange decision on my part. That is, I played rook to d1. The rook, of course, isn't doing anything here. So a 4. With a 4, I should have taken the chance to seize space on the queen side. I played rook to d1, just trying to simply arrange my pieces. Knight to d3. I moved out from under the x-ray, meaning if the knight jumps somewhere, the knight on c5 it would be hanging, and I didn't want to allow that. And after the move knight to d3, I caught myself thinking that it would be very dangerous if Magnus managed to bring his knight to the d4 square. After all, that's essentially an outpost. I can't drive it out of there with pawns, and the bishop, I have a light squared bishop, and in short, the knight would be there forever. The position would clearly be problematic for me then. Immediately, knight to b5 fortunately can't be played because of knight to e5, which is a discovered attack on the pawn. I took it. But after the move bishop to a6, that was already the beginning of something. It started looming in front of me, and I realized I couldn't allow that to happen. I played a 4. That is, I restricted the knight and took control of that square. b5 is also a good move. b3. Takes. And now, after the move rook to b8, it turns out that the rook on d1 and the rook on f1 are doing absolutely nothing. They're standing there completely uselessly. Of course, it would have been better for me if the rook were on a1, supporting the pawn from behind. And I could have used that rook as well. And now, to maintain a rather significant advantage, you have to find a computer-level move that's extremely hard to find. On the first line, the computer's top suggestion is queen to e1. The idea of this move, as I understand it, is to transfer, possibly later, the queen to c3, or to support the pawn on a5, because the rook cannot get into my camp anywhere, and this rook will come back to support the pawn. On the other hand, the knight will always come to d4 if the pawn advances. Overall, this solution is extremely illogical. There might also be the idea of sending the knight to c6. That probably is the strongest idea. So really, the move queen to e1 is truly a computer move, impossible to find, especially in a blitz game. I mean, the pieces are positioned very strangely. By the way, when I'm showing some variations, don't pay attention to the clock. Right now, for example, we both have 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Rook to b1 is a more human move, meaning that you take control of the open file, start fighting for it instead of just giving it away. Magnus plays knight to c4, we exchange, and then rook to b1. I thought that simplifying the position would be good for me right now, but actually I was mistaken, because now Magnus's queen comes into play, and his pieces invade my camp. And here it's quite difficult for me to untangle myself. So the last chance to somehow fight for a win here is to play rook to a1 and finally put the rook behind the passed pawn. Then, bring the queen back to e1 again and push this pawn forward. Rook to b1. I tried to play too cautiously to simplify the position, and now it's already clear that I don't have time to send my passed pawn anywhere. Magnus's pieces are near my king, near my pieces, and there are always some unpleasant threats looming. I'm still trying to simplify the position. And here I started to panic a little because I couldn't see a decent move. Again, I didn't want to just give up the pawn for nothing. Although on the other hand, there was again the knight, and again queen to c7 would have been a move. So actually, the solution was interesting. Bishop to a2, you could play queen to e2. That is just sort of waiting while the pawn on e4 is under attack. I played knight to e1, and knight to e1 is already quite, well, not exactly a serious blunder. The evaluation doesn't go beyond equality. I wanted to somehow transfer the knight to f3 and defend the pawn on e4. But all of this is too cautious, and with moves like these, of course, it's impossible to win. You won't be able to win the game. There was also an unpleasant move, knight to a3. And here I really had to find the only moves. If queen to d3, there would have been queen to b4 in response, the double attack, or the move queen to a1 also would have won, because there's a knight behind the bishop. All of this I was saying and seeing during the game on the broadcast. I was talking it through, I saw it. And in fact, there was no other square for the queen. So queen to b3 is the only move. And during the game, when I was considering the move queen to b3, at first I thought that after queen to a1, it would be the same situation. And unexpectedly, I ended up losing the game. It seemed like I had an extra pawn from the opening, but somehow Magnus managed to get in. But unexpectedly, I managed to find a very good resource for counterplay, especially since time is running out here. I have 1 minute, Magnus has 2 minutes and 23 seconds. I have to play quickly again. Initially, I was considering the line where maybe I could play knight to c2. Then Magnus exchanges and the pawn starts running forward. But here, unfortunately, first of all, the knight manages to stop the pawn. And the bishop can do it too, if needed. It moves to c5 to take control of the a7 square. So it became clear that I needed to save that tempo somewhere to find it. And I pushed the pawn to a5. Now if he takes... If the queen takes the bishop, then the pawn runs through. No one has time to stop it. I managed to save that very tempo. Neither the knight can reach a7, nor the bishop. By the way, it would have been a beautiful win. But that won't work against Magnus. And if he takes with the knight, then knight to c2. Queen of 5, he has to take. The queen has no other moves. And I play queen to b1. So it turns into a queen and knight versus a queen and bishop. But honestly, it's much easier to play with a queen and knight than with a queen and bishop. Overall, the queen and knight work together much better and are much more dangerous than the queen and bishop. That's why Magnus played bishop to d2. Well, after the move bishop to d2, the position is finally equalized. After the move knight to c2, Magnus is forced to exchange pieces. Knight to c2, queen takes c2, and bishop again. The situation is that Magnus has 1 minute 20 seconds, I have 53 seconds, and I realize that now they're going to flag me hard. Of course, the position is absolutely drawn, opposite colored bishops. The main thing here is to keep the black pawn's movement on the king side under control so that no problems arise, and also to place the king on g2 so nothing can come in with a pin, and then the position will be completely equal. All that's left is to shuffle the queen back and forth, which is exactly what started happening. So at this point, the rest of the game doesn't really have much chess content left. I moved my queen, positioned my bishop, and started shuffling my pieces in place, trying to save time. Magnus, well, he just started playing really hard for the flag, trying to find something somewhere, some transfers, maneuvers with the knight. And in the end, that is, he decided to push the pawn to the g5 square, because there's the 50 move rule. If 50 moves pass without any captures or pawn moves forward, then a draw is recorded, so that's why the pawn has to advance. Here, of course, the most precise move is just to attack the h5 pawn with the queen, again to avoid any risk. Although really, it's quite simple. It's a draw. Queen takes on f6, takes, queen to c3. I offer a queen trade because exchanging queens means an automatic draw, attacking the pawn on h5. Here, of course, the simplest and most accurate move is to play queen to e4, exchanging queens without disrupting your pawn structure. But again, a bit in a panic, I played queen to f5, which is also a draw, and took the pawn. h4, king a5. Here I got a little worried because I thought some problems might arise, the pawns could start advancing. God forbid I lose one of my weak pawns. I had 23 seconds left, a bit less time. So I had to look for a precise way to make a draw here. I played f3, king f4, bishop d3, bishop e7. Here, probably f5. It would have been unpleasant if Magnus had played that. Although, of course, that's also a draw. But he went to capture the pawn. He sacrificed one, and then sacrificed the second as well to create two pawns on the same file. The king stands on a white square, and the bishop is hovering here, defending the pawn on d5 and not letting black break through anywhere. Because it's well known that in endgames with opposite colored bishops, one pawn and sometimes even two, or there are even situations where 3 pawns are not enough to win the game. That's why basically bishop to d6, bishop to b5, king to g5. I just started holding my ground. Magnus tried his last chance to catch me with a pre-move, but I tried to make my pre-moves very carefully. If you accidentally don't capture this pawn, if you make a careless pre-move, then the position on the board is already lost, because the pawns break through and you end up with a pants formation. They took on c7 with the bishop. And again, Magnus kept making a million more moves here. He was trying really hard to flag me. That is, to make 49 moves, then push the f-pawn. And then try to make another 49 moves. But in the end, before I ran out of time, I managed to either repeat the position or make 50 moves. It's not that important. But of course, it was a very dirty attempt to flag me, with quite a lot of time on the clock too. But what can you do? It's a time control without increment. Esports. Titled Tuesday. That's the kind of game it was against Magnus Carlsen. Before this, we had 2 games in Titled Tuesday, both of which I lost. And then, after a long struggle, finally, I managed to successfully secure my very first half point against the most formidable and greatest champion of all time. I truly hope that someday in the near future, I will manage to achieve a full victory against him as well. Well, thank you for watching. If you want to elevate your level of performance and play and reach new heights in your game, it is essential that you remember to do this. Follow the link in the description to my website with exclusive courses that will help you become stronger. No fluff, only the most essential information for your further growth. It doesn't matter if it's an opening course or a course that improves your overall chess understanding. In every single lesson and module, you'll get exactly the specific knowledge that is essential for your steady and consistent improvement over time. And if you carefully go through and truly absorb the information I share, I personally guarantee that you'll finally break through your current rating ceiling. I am truly looking forward to seeing you inside the program very soon.